it's great to have someone who's keen to have instruction, I suppose, and get on with it rather than
Yeah.
lots of people kind of want to be leaders, but of course, you need more people to actually get on with and get the work done rather than lead. Welcome to the Ground Investigation podcast, where we delve into stories of those shaping the foundations of our world. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that icon bell to stay updated on our latest episodes. Today, we're honored to have Tory Donnelly with us, with a career spanning from environmental consulting to leading one of Northeast's fastest growing drilling companies. Tory brings a wealth of experience and insights into the wealth beneath our feet. Tory, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your early career in environmental consulting, managing some of the major petroleum accounts and up to the kind of, let's just do that.
Sure. Through college, I interned at a small environmental firm in the Northeast and went right out of college, worked in environmental consulting for 20 years, working for retail petroleum projects mostly. Heavy in, my work was around health and safety. It was hiring new hires, making sure that they fit into the culture of petroleum industry, which was really taxing on the team. So we were high performing, high energy for 20 years, did that. And after 20 years, I was hired by Summit Drilling to run operations and create their safety culture. Not that the drilling industry back then had a safety culture, but it really was not in tune with the major oil, shall we say, where their health and safety culture was really embedded, and developed for beyond 30 years. So I brought that culture, into the drilling industry and really raised Summit Drilling to qualify to work on, retail petroleum projects. So, there also, lots of hiring, constantly training new people, whether it was skill sets or health and safety.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit the transition into Summit Drilling, and then perhaps we can touch on the kind of training aspect of the health and safety as well, because sometimes certain drilling companies, health and safety, I think it depends on the size of the company. Sometimes it's kind of second or third in line, and sometimes it's very top.
Yeah. Hiring was extremely difficult over the 10 years. We found that hiring from other drilling firms really did not work out because they were set in their ways. The culture at Summit had very high standards, and there was a lot of intolerance actually when we brought people on from another drilling firm, and it really never really worked out. So we switched gears and we hired employees right out of like trade schools. Anybody who enjoyed mechanical labor and physical labor, enjoyed being outdoors, was really our target. And it was a hard sell sometimes. It really was a hard sell. We did a lot of work with veterans transitioning. I partnered with a company called Bridging the Gap out of New Jersey, and we transitioned many military veterans into our industry, which it was an easy transition in that the health and safety culture was already embedded. They, took direction, and they, were it just worked out very, very well. Plus, it was a nice way to give back, to our veterans and give them a career path that really worked out well for us and for them.
Great. I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later on as well. I was wondering if you can let us know some of the lessons learned in moving from the consultant to more of the operations and leadership role.
Oh, at Summit, yeah. It's just consistency. Consistency in who you hire, and almost in any job, really. And if you know a hire is not working out, the risk of keeping them on board is just too great. It's making that swift decision to not have them part of your team. Drilling is high risk. Everything we do is high risk, and that's a challenge. And making sure that they own their actions, a driller's job starts at 5 a.m. and they get to a job site at 8 a.m. and then they leave a job site at 5, and their day's not over. They really put in 12 13, 14 hours a day. The travel time is brutal. So it's making sure that we manage their days. And as I always try to teach my managers is you need to manage our clients, really, their expectations, and really plan out the driller's day and manage the expectations. So I would always say you have to consult the consultants, as drillers, and taking that to the next level, that we're just not manual laborers. We're a partner in any job, whether it's health and safety and job execution, but it's really giving the buy-in and the forward thinking that the job, has to go slow, methodical, and it's just not production. It's about, preserving our employees and making sure that they're just not worn thin, worn to the bone. And that was a big push. That was another cultural switch from, not only health and safety, but drillers not just being laborers on job sites, that there were, talented people who had input on job sites, and that they were, partnering on a job site, not just, there to execute a task. But that took years, and we we were known to let some of our clients go because they were not in tune with our health and safety culture. And they also sometimes, did not treat some of our employees with the respect, So that was a long time, many years of pushing that.
Excellent. So you mentioned the risk of keeping someone on, and that's just because perhaps they're just not aligned in terms of the health and safety, the attitudes towards it. And of course, that can become pervasive throughout your team and trying to create that, I suppose, not camaraderie, but team unit in which we're all kind of pointing towards the same way, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, most of our crews were, at the time, 3-person crews. And if you have a weak link, health and safety, some person that doesn't have their head on a swivel, looking out for risk, watching the backs, just think of all the overhead issues that we have, utilities, that, there used to be, there would be a team that were pre-clearing locations. And if they did not pre-clear to the right depth, right diameter, the drillers would, hope and pray sometimes that, locations were pre-cleared properly. And if you didn't have that trust in the crew that was there ahead of you, and trust that they were, that they were trained properly, sometimes, it was, they considered that life and death. Luckily, because we did have, high standards in our training, knock on wood, we never had an issue with that. Don't get me wrong, we did have utility strikes, but nothing catastrophic, things that could be repaired. But yeah, health and safety is very black and white. You're on board or you're not on board. And if you're not on board, you're not working, with that company. It was, pretty simple. The pre-screening and the training was intensive. Just onboarding, the cost of onboarding, estimate probably $4,000 to $5,000 per employee. It was 5 days of training, background checks, drug and alcohol testing. You have to pass a physical, medical screening, making sure that you can lift 50 pounds. So it was very extensive, getting somebody onboarded just to enter in would take up to a month. And then, to develop those skills, 6 months to a year. It's a very long time to, that mentor program, onboarding someone. Expensive and long.
Yeah, it's upfront. And of course, not everyone stays. And then when you train them up and they get experience at your company, then potentially they can leave later on. But you have to keep going. Otherwise, you don't really have a business.
Struggling to find top geotechnical and geoenvironmental talent? You could use a generalist recruiter, or you could use a specialist. At Geo Expert Search, we place experts where they belong. Across the UK, USA, Australia, and New Zealand. No highways, no bridges, no structures. Just geotechnical and geoenvironmental. Now and forever. Geo Expert Search. Finding the right people for the right roles with no wasted time. Visit geoexpertsearch.com to learn more.
So I see you kind of doubled the drilling size since 2009. I mean, obviously you've moved on since then and you're at another company now, but and that's just down to the, that program which we were discussing just there.
The doubling was through a few acquisitions and acquiring newer technology for New Jersey. Um, we we invested in sonic drilling, which back then was a little bit new for at least the New Jersey Northeast area. Um, and we grew that to 4 rigs. It was a very big investment. It was a little bit of a risk there because selling it, Sonic is known to be a little bit more expensive. The operations and maintenance of a Sonic rig is a little expensive. However, if you're an environmental consultant, you just love the product. And, we took the risk, bought a few rigs, and those rigs really have, worked out. Our oldest, or Summit's oldest rig is 11 years old and still running and just doing amazing work. Really, it's now the heart of Summit Drilling, or the Sonic division there. Yeah, they're remarkable pieces of equipment.
It's definitely becoming more popular in the UK. There's lots more companies now who have kind of jumped on the bandwagon of sonic drilling. It's been around for a fair while, but
Yeah.
they
It has,
definitely
yeah.
seem to be some of the larger brands, I suppose, drilling companies making those investments, and they do charge them out at higher rate. And sometimes if they're not actually needed for those particular sites, it can be a bit hard to swallow. Um, but yeah, it's becoming more popular. And I suppose when you're talking about the environmental side, you mean the kind of sampling level which it can produce, I presume.
Yeah, lithologically, the core samples on a sonic rig is just incomparable. Sites that had been drilled for 20 years, hundreds of bores, from a geoprobe, let's just say, or a split spoon from a hollow stem auger. You get there with a sonic core, and it's a game changer. Things show up that you never thought were there. Clay lenses that were never seen before. It's a true reading of what's in the subsurface. Yeah, yeah. Usually, job sites that if nobody has used Sonic before, and it's an older projects. Once they use Sonic, they really, they want to use it all the time on job sites. It's really, you know, production isn't as quick as people think, because it's a pretty intensive setup, setting up a Sonic rig. However, it's just an amazing piece of equipment. Safe wise, fewer moving parts, because it's vibrations and not spinning. So yeah, it's a great product.
They seem quite technologically advanced as well. The rigs, some of them will kind of change over as well, change over the barrels, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So there's kind of much less, interaction, I suppose, from the driller, less chance of history because we all know, less chance of injury because we all know drillers who don't quite have 5 fingers.
It's
But with those rigs, it certainly seems to help in relation to that as well. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the approach you mentioned about acquisitions. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and the regional expansion? How was the strategy? What was the plan there? How did you go about?
um, we did a lot of work on culture. To be honest with you, our first acquisition was with a smaller family owned business, and we realized right out of the gate that we did not want to align with a company that could not ease into our culture, ease into our standards, because we were known to be tough. Um, to qualify to work, I keep going back to that for the retail petroleum. You had to have very strict health and safety culture. So instead of fighting the culture, we went with a company. Our first acquisition was Tabasco Drilling. It was in southern New Jersey, and just the managers there fit culturally. They were extremely intelligent. They were compliant with health and safety. And the drillers were beyond technical. They were just they're still actually at the company, just really industry leaders in geotech. Actually, they did tons of work all over the nation, and so that's how we really worked it. That was our game plan, and that was our choice. Just making sure that it wasn't going to be a battle culturally. Because that's we had learned that with another acquisition that I wouldn't even talk about. It was just did not go well. It was a two-person, but just did not fit culturally. And if it's not a cultural fit, I wouldn't recommend doing it because you really in an acquisition, it's really the talent, particularly in drilling. You could buy a drill rig, but, you know, having a driller with the right attitude and management with the right attitude, they're diamonds in the rough. Somebody that, they're the forward facing people, your drillers. And if they're not willing to treat the client with respect or buy into health and safety, that's something, they're usually set in their ways. It's hard for them to learn that, it's so, that was our first get. It really wasn't about the assets, the equipment. It was about the people for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of a new generation, I think, isn't it? Because I say a lot of them drillers would have bad habits. So the newer ones, especially if they're health and safety focused and they've got team management as well. So you mentioned about bridging the gap earlier on to recruit and support military veterans. Did you find that I assume that they would have a good attitude coming straight from the military? You could tell us a little bit more about that, what you didn't mention earlier.
Yeah. What's amazing about the veterans, their resumes were 5-6 pages. I mean, so much experience that most veterans really have a tough time transitioning into a job because they're kilo maintenance operators and they're physically, tired. They've done tours and um, really have a difficult time transitioning. So I worked with the company, Bridging the Gap, and we would work with veterans, kind of update their resumes. And if it wasn't a fit for Summit Drilling, we would help them situate jobs. It wasn't just hiring, it was more than that. It was really prepping a whole bunch of veterans to transition. And then, we could kind of, interview people that we thought might be a fit, so they did work well, like I said, health and safety wise, it wasn't new to them by any means. So that was an easy transition and hard work. Drilling is a lot of manual labor. So that was not new to them. So it was an easy transition, and they absolutely, most people in the military, like, steps and directions and work orders and, so they're very task specific. So it really worked out well.
It's great to have someone who's keen to have instruction, I suppose, and get on with it rather than
Yeah.
lots of people kind of want to be leaders, but of course you need more people to actually get on with and get the work done rather than lead. As well, how in terms of their military training, with the demands, with the environmental drilling aspect, how did that kind of work? You were saying it obviously it was a really good fit. I was wondering if you could just let us know a little bit more about the environmental drilling aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, getting back to the pre-screening, part of the medical exam is if a person can lift more than 50 pounds. So like I said, our morning started at 5 a.m. loading what we call tenders, the water trucks, pallets and pallets of concrete and gravel and PVC and steel. So before they even get to the job site, they're loading and they're lifting and they're moving tooling all day long. They're a lot of things that, I was saying about Sonic, just the stand up, the setting up over a borehole, managing water is huge. So if you're, moving water to 55-gallon drums, I forget what that translates in, 250 pounds, 300 pounds. I'm not even quite sure, but heavy, everything is heavy and you have tools, drum lifters, but even a drum lifter is heavy the hoses are heavy. Everything is heavy. So the fitness level is really difficult. And, the people I manage would always say, don't get me somebody who's gym strong, just because you can lift weights doesn't mean you're, a driller. I have, I've worked with so many drillers who were 60, 70 years old who could outwork a gym strong, 20-year-old for sure. So, the veterans were, could easily transition into that really physicality of being a driller or a driller assistant.
Definitely, yeah. You can still have someone with big muscles who's actually quite lazy. it's a good focus for that time, for that particular goal. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a hard worker. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your involvement with the National Groundwater Association and contributions to the industry standards.
Yeah, that was such a great experience for a few years there. Another peer of mine had nominated me to the board of directors, and it just really opened up a whole world that it was more. It's National Groundwater Association is predominantly for production wells. That's a generalization. They also have a smaller science and engineering portion, which is really where I came from as a consultant, but I was more on the contractor side by that time. So we did a lot of work. The board of directors, chose the direction on an annual basis on where, studies would go. At my time there, PFOAs, PFAS, I'm not sure, if you're, a DuPont byproduct, was up and coming. So, that had been a very big push, particularly, for the United States. How is that going to be regulated? And right now it's on a state by state basis. But it's, as everybody knows, it's everywhere. But, this is, gosh, we're going on 7 or 8 years now. Still in the news, still, how to regulate it, how do you remediate it? That's still an ongoing problem, will be an ongoing problem. So beyond our time for sure. That and another aspect of the national level is water rights, which is so interesting. And I'm not sure if you have that issue in the UK, but just imagine, water rights. How do you govern water? It's subsurface, obviously. Production wells pull over state boundaries. Rivers are being dammed, and it's a very big problem, particularly out west. With drought conditions. And how to work around water rights. So we would do position pieces on water rights. We would do what we called fly-ins to Congress, and have talking points. And it was really great. It was a lot of advocacy, something I had never done, but it was just a fantastic time for sure. Yeah.
I've heard there's kind of water allowances, like if you're a farmer, you're allowed this much water and that sort of thing. I haven't heard of it too much here. I'm not entirely sure if it exists. I suppose the hotter the climate becomes and the more
Yeah.
people require water, then these things are inevitable, aren't they? We're gonna get to a point where there will be arguments and fallouts and everything else. So in terms of the pond, I watched a film, Black Waters, which is about that.
Mhm.
So that was quite an eye-opening film. So one of the things is about Teflon, wasn't it?
Yes.
In the use of Teflon, which uh, they still sell now. I think they had a huge fine, and then
Yes.
somehow they wormed their way out of that fine, or they can put it on ice for decades at a time.
Yes.
Again, but anyway, that was a film that was quite interesting. But I'm sure there are other companies who do similar things, and if they can get away with it, then they do, and they can.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the work that we had done way before PFAS was on a national scale, really. We worked on a lot of government projects at air forces. Fire suppression foam has PFAS in it. So at Summit for 10, 15 years, we had been drilling on sites that, you know, before it broke nationally, I would say. So, um, and that was before we knew it was everywhere. We would have to take off gaskets that potentially had Teflon on our rigs. We couldn't wear rain gear, nothing with Gore-Tex on it that potentially had PFAS on it. Everything had to be sanitized, PFAS free when we were drilling on these sites. And then lo and behold, 10 years later, we realized that, it's in our bodies, it's everywhere. Yeah, very sad that, they were fearful of cross-contamination, that we would bring PFAS onto a job site.
What advice would you give for emerging professionals in environmental and geotechnical engineering?
Stick with it, never stop learning. That's for sure. Silly not to, bring in AI into this, especially for geotech engineering, especially exploration. or geotech. Working on twin models. I'm not sure if have heard of that. They actually, and the predictiveness of, just imagine production wells now with AI. They're, it's slowly being used. I do have a peer that I work with that does data management for the oil industry now. And oddly, they're really just using that. And, just knowing a oil production well costs billions of dollars, and not to utilize this, that data. Um, but just like anything, any company, data is siloed in companies and it's not utilized properly in each different group, and every business, is siloed with their data. So I think, my getting back to what I would say is, just being open-minded and keep pushing forward and in technology. You know, um, I feel like our industry, particularly the drilling industry, is aging. If I look back at the Summit, the average age was well over 50, probably 60 years old for drillers. And we don't have a lot of people coming into the industry. On the consultant side, very different. But, just think of the drilling industry. It's very manual labor. And that's just does not appeal. High risk manual labor does not appeal to, younger groups. So it's, and I'm not quite sure how to fix that, on the drilling side. How to, that was always a struggle, closing that loop. How do we keep, you know, having new blood come in? And so it's a challenge. So never stop hiring. That would be one thing. You never can stop hiring, would be my advice. And stay up on, AI. Really, it's a great tool to use.
Yeah, it is becoming more prevalent in the industry, and it's only just really, I think. I'm sure there's some people who've been using it for longer periods of time, but imagine what it would be like in 10 years' time. Because I think those companies that start to wield AI efficiently now and start to learn about it and utilize it as much as possible will be kind of on top, in a decade's time, I'm sure. Even if it's just for, looking at data and kind of helping with that, you're still going to need maybe a consultant or someone else to kind of look over it, because it can still make, I'm thinking now, what I use ChatGPT and a few others like that. And most of the time it's absolutely fantastic and it does some real kind of good heavy lifting, but you also have to read through why would you say that? And it's completely like, where did you get that from? Just make something up, right? No. Fact check that. Well, I don't know what you mean. Okay, fair enough.
Or just ask it a different way, I've learned. Just keep asking until it sounds truthful, and then fact check.
That is definitely important, is the way you ask. So it is definitely about what you put into it is kind of what you'll get back out of it as well. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about the role of leadership in navigating future challenges of
Yep.
opportunities.
Oh, back to the drilling industry, right? The challenge will always be is I just touched upon it. Really, is the aging out and that gap in technology. Really, prior to leaving the drilling industry, we had, I think it was 4 senior drillers retire, and that knowledge, these people drilled every state, every county, every town in the Northeast, and you could just ask them, where's depth to water? Are we going to get hung up? Is it, um, what rig should we send? As simple as that. Of course you can Google that, but these drillers just had that wealth of knowledge, and sharp as anything, and we've kept a few on, like, as a consultant, that we could, reach out to, but they would know job sites, that, were EPA investigations for the past 20 years, and they would know them so intimately. So, that for sure is problematic, and backfilling those people would take 20 years, and we're just not seeing that talent staying in the drilling industry. It's not many people are coming in, that show that capacity to want to stick with that job. And especially geotech, I would have to say too, I came from environmental consulting and drilling and geotech. We did very little geotech because the margins are just not there. So what we can charge for a geotech job is far less. So I can't imagine what geotech drilling companies, the pay has to be, I'm not quite sure, this is, I'm just throwing that out there, but if you can charge less, I can't imagine what you pay, your employees. So I think that might be a challenge too. That, the margins have to be a little bit lower in geotech rather than environmental and, translating that into pay. Yeah, not to fact check that one on me, but it's just an assumption.
I was thinking that as we were talking, because I know kind of the rough rates of drillers here in the UK,
Mhm.
and I know that on some of them comparatively, some people say, well, I can take salary X and be away from home, and everything else, or probably just get a little bit more work around the corner.
Yes.
Maybe it's not as fulfilling, maybe it's not as interesting, but in tech, because they're away from home a lot as well, aren't they, drillers? They certainly are here in the UK. They'll travel away sometimes Sunday night, sometimes Monday morning, and be back late Friday evening. And I think that's so tiring because you add the driving on as well, and you add it working outside, whether it's hot, whether it's rainy, freezing
Yeah.
cold. Um, so it doesn't leave much energy left for anything else. So it's a way of life, as I'm always told, rather than just a job, of course.
Yeah, and you leave, usually Sunday night and, something we hadn't touched upon, most of our drillers have to have a commercial driver's license. They're driving 60-ton rigs down the road, and that's not easy to get. To obtain that takes more training. So there's just so many levels of, you know, bridges that they have to cross before they even, become borderline competent at what they do, health and safety wise, commercial driver's license, and skill set. Yeah, it's a lot.
It
But
definitely is. So could you just give us your kind of final thoughts and messages to aspiring engineers and industry professionals?
yeah, yeah, just recapping, never stop learning, keep on your back foot, make sure that you're taking those extracurricular courses, so that you're up on, new strategies. Stay on your contractors for sure, especially your drilling, that high risk. Um, and, it's work-life balance is important nowadays. Not when I, came up in the industry, but I am absolutely seeing the difference, people that I've hired, more recently in the past 10 years that, um, people my age have to kind of, relate in a different way. We work 60, 70 hours a week. Some, work on Saturdays and overnights a lot. And, it's definitely changing culture. And I see, the benefits of that too. I'm glad that that the up and coming professionals are seeing that, it's not always about work, having that balance is so important. So keep at it and, make sure that you're staying on top of that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely expected more, I think, as a kind of standards, and kind of the COVID situations
Yep.
kind of helped a little bit about that. With kind of some people working from home a few days a week, bit more flexibility. And this is opposed really when you think in the actual drilling industry, you don't really get that. You don't really get the flexibility. You don't really get the work from home unless potentially you can do some roles. But I mean that's potentially another reason why it's hard to recruit going forward for these particular roles, isn't it? I think. So, Tori, thank you for sharing the journey and insight of us. Your leadership exemplifies the impact on a strategic vision and dedicated in shaping the future of environmental services. To our viewers, if you found this episode enlightening, please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more conversation with industry leaders. Tori, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.